So I don't know whether you have ever been in a training and perhaps a chart like this was created for you. Or perhaps you may have created this chart or something similar to it. Now, this chart I created today using the pens that were available in this venue. And I have to say, if you have an interest in being a great trainer and wanting to do great training and create great training environments, the first thing you need to do is never rely on venue pens. I never do, because the risk is that I end up creating charts that are quite difficult to read with pens that are pretty old and terrible. So what I do is I always carry around my very own packet of Mr. Sketches. Now, Mr. Sketch, these are the pens that I use. I'm not terribly attached to what kind of pen you might like to use, but these are reasonably priced and create a really great chart. They're quite vivid colours and they have a really lovely wedge tip, which is great for creating charts. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. How do I move away from creating a chart that's kind of dead and boring and creating a chart that comes to life for participants? So straight away, I'm going to create a chart for you here and just talk about a few techniques that you might be able to use to create more interesting charts. So the first thing I might do is a heading that's slightly more interesting. Now, I frequently use red in my headings, red because I could write big with those, but I would never use red for the bulk of my chart, typically because it's quite difficult to read from a distance. So I would do red as a heading, and I'm happy with uppercase in my headings, but typically I'll use lowercase on the main body. Okay? So a nice big bright uppercase heading. I've drawn my curve first, spaced my heading out around the curve, and now I'll just finish this off in such a way that it creates something a little more interesting. I've now created a very quick banner at the top of my chart, which is just way more interesting than a standard heading and a squiggly line underneath. Then when I use my body, do my body text, I'll only ever use colours that are quite easy to be seen. So I'll use colours like brown, blue, green and purple. And I use alternating colours to bring the chart to life. And I use a handwriting that's big enough to be seen, and because it's also lowercase, it makes it easy on the eyes for people to read. And that's really all I'm ever thinking about when I'm creating charts, is what makes it interesting, engaging and readable for the group, for the participants. It's always useful to have your own font. You know, what's the font that you can easily do quickly, that you practice, and it's nice and readable for the group. If handwriting's not your strong point, you might like to create charts before you get to the session. It's always quite good for a group and pretty impressive as a trainer if you can create nice charts that are easy for the audience to read and have a bit of embellishment about them. So straight away, I've used really nice, dark, bright, vivid colours that are easy for the group to read from anywhere in the room. And I've also used a nice, straight text and a font that my handwriting font that I'm very comfortable with and have practiced over time. I then might add bullet points. Now, there are many different ways you can do bullet points. Quite simply, a dot can work as a bullet point. My personal favourite is the square with the dropped shadow. And done very simply, using the finer part of the pen to do the square and the fat part of the pen to create the shadow. But you can use arrows, you can use asterisks as well. You still get a good result from your bullet points. And the final piece that I would add to this chart, again to bring the readability and just to have the chart be a little more interesting, is I might add a fine line on my list to separate my bullet points. And just by using some very, very simple techniques, I've managed to create a chart that's way more interesting, easier for the group to read, and just shows a little bit of skill and talent, which is always impressive for people who do this kind of work, and certainly will leave a great and lasting impression on the group. Thanks.